All right. So any thoughts about, I know you'd already done the concentration practices before, but any thoughts about the pranayama or the pranayama in combination with the?
No, I actually did. So I did the pranayama twice with the meditations. I actually stopped doing the pranayama because I think just doing it right after while I'm like in recovering, I think it was a little too much.
Absolutely.
I think it was kind of making me a little activated a little bit, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely stimulating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'm gonna
one
do it like once I feel like 100%.
Yeah, totally. Or not, either way. So the one we're going to do today is a little probably gentler, but also more specifically oriented. So we'll just see, again, just see how you feel and do it or don't do it.
Okay.
It's just to enhance. It's not at all required.
Yeah, no, I like it. The other thing I was going to ask is that when we did them with Susan,
yeah,
she kept adding things to them, right? Like I remember at the very end, like she added like movements to them.
Yes, and that's the same tradition. So okay. The way I was taught is you do it with the movements first, and then just the breathing, and then there's just this visualization that didn't work for me. And the movements are great, and they're less intense than the breathing, but the breathing's just so efficient. It's just so quick.
Yeah.
And the movements are complicated. Like it takes a while to get in the hang of doing all of that in the right amount of time.
Yeah, I remember them just being like extremely complicated, and I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to remember.
It makes sense after a while if you do it I learned it with like a CD. So if you do it sort of repetitively every day with the CD, eventually it starts to make sense and you can remember it, but it takes a while. But that's like the one, what we did is like the shortcut.
Right. No, I remember like when she started out, she started very simple, and then the movements were like at the very end.
So this week, we're going to start to dive into insight. And as you know, because you've done this series of meditations before, the first week is really from the Advaita Vedanta tradition, which is a non-dual tradition that really focuses on sort of who we are by eliminating who we aren't. In India, this is called a neti approach. Not this, you're not this, you're not this. And by figuring out what you're not, that leaves whatever's left to be probably what you are. Jack Cornfield has some really nice descriptions of like why this is like a question for us. So he says, how did you get in there? This weird thing, little remnants of claws and a vestigial tail, a hole at one end where you stuff dead plants and animals regularly. It's bizarre incarnation, and there you are in it. I think, we all probably have had this question from time to time, but it's strange, really, being a person. So he says, the question is, who are you? And that our practices are designed to shift our sense of identity from the small sense of self, which he describes as, there's positive sides of the small sense of self, but the negative side would be a sense of separation and what he calls the body of fear, meaning identifying with our trauma and our unworthiness. Shifting from that sense of self to remembering who we truly are, according to these traditions, our fundamental nobility, beauty, and dignity. And I think it's important, he points out, that we're not trying to get around being human. This is meant to enhance our sense of being human. And that can be tricky because it can be used to avoid being human, I think. But what we're looking to do is to become essentially fearless, loving awareness so that we can actually be present to our pain and our grief and our loneliness and our humanity in a liberated way. So that's the idea, not to avoid those things, although you will see people using it to avoid it as much as anything else. So our practice asks us to touch our insecurities and our fear without the intent of fixing them or fixing ourselves. but instead to develop a loving awareness that's tender and respectful. Saying, yes, this is humanity, and trying to be with it, trying to actually do it fully from this point of view. And Jack points out that we can discover that who we are is magnificent and free and open, but we tend to take things to be ourselves. So we identify with our body. I mean, that's pretty common. We identify with our feelings, right? Even though they might be different in 10 minutes. We identify with our roles. We identify our roles in our family. We identify with our jobs. But, you know, you have one role when you're at work, and then you need to put that down to come home and have a different role in your family. So while there's nothing wrong with these roles, we need to sort of disengage from that sense that that identifies us and limits us. And I've told you this before, but I want to make sure Robin hears it, that there was a study done where a group of Asian American women were given a math test, and half were told on the way in, this is a math test, but women don't tend to do well in math, so do your best. And the other half were told, this is a math test, Asian origin people tend to do well in math, so do your best. And there was a significant differential in scores between the groups. So what we believe about ourselves, how we identify, starts to determine how our lives go and limitations on our lives. And it's not that we shouldn't honor our background, our nationality, our gender, but they're not who we really are, and they don't define us. They're just, you know, we can use them as like enhancements and a way to connect to people rather than, and to honor ourselves rather than to limit what we can do and how happy we can be. So what we're looking to become is the timeless, unborn awareness itself. And by the way, we're not looking to become it because we already are it. You can't become something you aren't, but we're looking to sort of uncover that identity. And Jack says, you know, the moment when you see you were trapped in fear or confusion, totally identified with it, and then it drops away and you experience an enormous release. It's not that your personality goes away, but you get a wider perspective in those moments. And that's the wider perspective that we're really looking for to get out of these practices. That's the freedom, is to just have a wider perspective. So let's do one, well, before we get into that, what's interesting in observing the practice of Advaita Vedanta in people, sort of now that I've seen, is, you know, the question is, for example, I had a good friend who practiced this stuff for a long time, and she's totally balanced, and I think her practice led her all the right places, but there was a period of time where she would just be like, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind. And that's not false. And yet, just as I said earlier, we need to be careful that we don't use these practices to disengage. And what we're going to do after, so we're going to spend 1 week disengaging from that pure sort of identity in order to re-engage the following 2 weeks in everything. So that's really the point. The point isn't what you aren't. The point is to not be so hooked to the ways we normally define ourselves so that we can then define ourselves much more broadly.
Would you say that, like, the people who tend to have that tendency to kind of go a little bit too far, not too far, but they just identify with that. It's a weird thing because you're actually kind of identifying with that in a way. So it kind of almost defeats the purpose because you're actually, I mean.
Exactly.
So, but I mean, would you say that the people who get into that, go in that direction, aren't doing other practices as well, or?
Well, think about even just mindfulness. I mean, basically, all types of meditation have to start with some kind of disengagement, right? Because we're walking around having a certain stream of thought and identifying with it. All of us. I don't care how spiritual you are. And In order, like that's the whole thing about sitting down on the cushion, doing mindfulness and not following every thought, but instead saying, okay, I'm going to watch my breath for a while. It's not that there's anything wrong with thoughts, but if we don't disengage with the normal thought stream, we're never going to have a different perspective, broader perspective. So disengagement is always sort of the first step. The question is whether you only take the first step. Mindfulness can be used to disengage from life. I'm just observing my thoughts and feelings. I'm not having them. That can help when thoughts and feelings are derailing us and making us depressed and anxious, even in the most subtle way. But at some point, we are having them and we need to deal with them well. And we don't want to deny them, avoid them, pretend they're not there.
Because otherwise you're never going to be able to have any relationships at all.
Yeah, or really engage with life.
Yeah.
But in order to deeply, fully engage, there's going to have to be some initial disengagement to sort of shift the patterns. That's all. So this is the initial disengagement, hopefully to people. But again, it's not even just in these really deep practices, honestly. Regular mindfulness practice that people are doing with an app and there's no teacher, and they're just, that's how you train a sharpshooter to kill people better with mindfulness, or a corporate raider to, do a better job, slashing companies and firing people because they did their mindfulness. So they're better able to do what they're doing, but it didn't bring them back into their heart.
Well, what I was going to say too is I haven't done this stuff. I'm just a beginner with this stuff, but what I've noticed is that I started with the mindfulness with you, and that there's just a really fine line between mindfulness and these other things. It's just, it's a very small step going into these other things, especially with between the mindfulness and the concentration ones. It's just a very small, it's almost difficult to tell the difference sometimes. But there is a difference. It's obvious at the same time. It's a weird thing.
There's a ton of overlap between mindfulness and concentration, but the intention's different. The ultimate goal is different. They start out the same, right? The first step in concentration is mindfulness, but the goal of concentration is to literally only have the object of concentration, and you even fall away and there's just the object of concentration. And if you're doing that, that's why concentration can be such a spiritual bypass. And I'm sure I did, I got hooked on concentration for, 3-4 years, I would say, where I just wanted to be like that because it was just blissful. And then you kind of, and then you get the kind of like residual bliss the rest of the day. And you kind of, don't really have to deal with all that much. And again, that's not helping to build relationships or improve, our ability to be compassionate or anything. And yet, I think it's helpful to support, the disengagement process that is the initial step to re-engaging in a different way. And that there's nothing wrong with it as long as it's not abused. And then in terms of mindfulness and insight, vipassana is the modern term for mindfulness, essentially, and it means insight. And that's not a mistake. That the Buddha said mindfulness will take you all the way. And all these things that we're doing, these informal insight practices are post-Buddha. They're Mahayana Buddhism, or, I don't know the dates on the non-dual yoga traditions. But basically, the Buddha just said, sort of do mindfulness and that'll take you there. And these are enhancements to get you there quicker by sort of describing what people have experienced in the slower process who got somewhere. And I like that because why not take advantage of all the modern technology that we have? Modern, like things that have only been around 2,000 years instead of 2,500 years or something. But at the same time, enough mindfulness taught well with context would get you there too. but slower and not taught. I think without the context, it might not happen.
It's interesting too, because all of the, most, a lot of the Kundalini stuff comes from, a lot of it comes from the yoga tradition, because he stole a lot of stuff, he borrowed a lot of stuff. But a lot of it comes from the Sikh religion.
Yep.
And they're from the 13 and 1400s. I mean, they're way past. I mean, that's almost considered, modern, 500, 600 years ago. It's really not that old at all. And it's all borrowed. It's all, a lineage from the, Indian and Buddhist, traditions and stuff. And there's a lot of borrowed stuff. But I mean, it's super new. I mean, it's a super new, type thing.
Yeah, but wouldn't you trace it back to the same roots? Probably.
I would think so. I would think so. I would think most of it comes from the yoga, more probably closer to like the yoga tradition, the hatha system. And
but if you think about the roots of the hatha system, maybe like, the Vedas, into the Upanishads and stuff, and that stuff really supported the Buddha as well. He was doing yogic concentration before he, started Buddhism, which he wasn't trying to start Buddhism. So that in my limited understanding, even the Sikh traditions could have just been, that when you start a tradition, like, yeah, there's a founder and certain ideas, but there was still a continuity of practice up to then.
Except that modern Sikh, I mean, not the Kundalini Sikhs, but the ethnic Sikhs are very anti, like, using any kind of like idolatry or imagery from Hinduism. I mean, like they don't want to associate at all with anything, with, Hindu religion or, a lot of Indian stuff. They want to kind of separate themselves from that, which is interesting because almost all their stuff comes from that. It's bizarre.
Yeah. But, you need to define your
own identity, I guess, is.
Yeah, define your way of doing it and make a point about, maybe there's, they have a real problem with that for a reason that,
definitely. It's for political and, social reasons. I mean, they were denigrated for centuries. I mean, they were put down for centuries. So,
and all of these practices, I think I said this last week too. It's so cool and interesting to watch, how religion, let's say, if you want, I mean, Buddhism, I guess, is a religion, interacts with culture. To where the same sort of religion can have an entirely different look when mixed with a different culture. And then what's interesting in that is like what's added. Like sometimes you lose some stuff, but often you gain, like the interaction of Buddhism with Taoism and Confucianism in, Japan and China, I think adds a lot of not just poetry, but sort of understanding, because there's a lot of really compelling ideas from those traditions. And yet you don't find that in Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like Catholicism in Latin America. I mean, it's like in Mexico, it added all of the kind of pre-Hispanic, what they call witchcraft, but I mean, that's a negative word. But I mean, it's stuff like that. A lot of like pre-Hispanic stuff is combined with Catholicism. I mean, it's like, it's there, like in plain sight. I mean,
yeah.
And they don't hide it at all. I mean, it's just part of what they've become. I mean, their version of Catholicism.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So there's a richness, I think, to not limiting our understanding to just, anyway. But then, not getting lost in the cultural aspects to really try to remember like what was beneficial about this tradition, and make sure we're not getting, and I know in Tibetan Buddhism, it's pretty easy to get caught in the trappings, the rituals. They're fun and they seem esoteric and sometimes they are. And that's fine, but like, what was the point of the practice and where is it trying to get us? So let's just Well, so we're going to do a little bit of breathing and a meditation to kind of kick off the week of doing the first 6 of the insight practice. But before I go there, I mean, you've done these before. Are there any, I don't know, and we'll talk about questions from the first 6 next week, hopefully with Robin, but I don't know, is there anything that came up for you?
So I haven't, I never, just for reasons that I just got, so I never completed the full Insight series.
Okay.
I did the first, it's the first 6 or 7 that are the first 6 that are the
Or 7 or 8, yeah, something like that.
So I did those the first like 7 or 8, and then I did about 6 or 7 after that. So I did probably about half, maybe a little more than half of the series. What I found was that, I mean, obviously the first like 6 or 7 are very, I mean, I actually found more of a kind of a bodily thing happening when I was doing the first like week. Just kind of, I almost say, it's just almost kind of out of body type stuff, but not that, like crazy. I mean, not to the point to where you're just like freaking out or something. And a lot of like bodily sensations, which I thought was interesting. And then going after that, knowing what you had said at the time, that after that, you do stuff to kind of bring you back, and to kind of like integrate it a little bit. And that was very helpful. So I'm actually looking forward to completing it, because I want to see what I want to do it all the way to the end. And I want to do it consecutively, because I was splitting it up so much just because I was so busy at the time.
Sure.
And I was trying to do I was doing some other meditations too, like on days where I just didn't have like the, time for the 30 minutes, from traveling and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll have more to say once I do it again, and when I do it more in consecutive order. But yeah,
that's good. So we're not planting ideas in Robin's head either, so she can go into it clean. So that's good. But in terms of the physical sort of sensation responses to the meditations, what I would guess is that basically when insights happen, arise that feel like deeply true to our being, there can be relaxation responses in the energy body. And that can be experienced as heat, sometimes contraction, sometimes, but more often even opening, like movements, which can have mostly positive, associated mental experiences, but it could be potentially
all of my experiences were positive or neutral. I would say more on the lines of neutral. And I think that if I was maybe in more of a negative like frame of mind, like in general, like in my life, I think maybe it would not have been so positive. But I think in general, my mind frame is pretty positive.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm neutral. I think is probably more accurate.
Okay, even more interesting. Good. All right, so we're gonna do the same 9-fold breathing, probably every time, but at least the next 3, just to kind of set the tone to the energy body. And then I'm going to introduce one technique, and we'll do it a couple times to make sure you sort of understand it. It's not complicated. But then that's a technique we'll do during the meditations. So twice during the meditation today, I will cue you to do this extra technique. And then when you're doing the meditations 1 through 6, because we have 6 days before we meet next time, you would have the option to do that intermittently during the meditation, should you decide that you like it and feel it is helpful. So let's start out with the 9-fold breathing, which is just sort of a basic foundation for settling in to meditate. So we'll take our upright position and close our eyes. Visualizing the 3 channels of light in the body. If you like to think of them as light, it doesn't have to. And we'll begin by clearing the right channel. So we'll, if you like, take the right thumb to the base of the right fourth finger. And then we'll press the right fourth finger to the right nostril, and we'll slowly inhale through the left nostril, down the left side of the body to the junction. We hold the breath slightly as we switch the finger to the other side. And exhale up the right channel, slowly at first, and then more forcefully at the end, clearing the right side. And then we switch. We inhale left, visualizing the air coming down. We pause at the junction, switch the hand when you're ready, and exhale gently at first, more forcefully toward the end, but still, relatively gentle, clearing the right. And then one more time, we inhale left. Switch when you're ready, and exhale right. And then we release, and we tune into any felt sense of openness on the right, in the right side channel. And then we'll take the left ring finger to the base of the left thumb. And when you're ready, we'll take the, whoa, I switched the hands? No. Okay, we'll take the left ring finger to the left nostril, and we'll slowly inhale through the right, tracing the path of the breath down to the junction. We'll switch sides when you're ready with a little hold of the breath. And then exhale up the left side, clearing the left side channel. Again, inhaling right, trace the path of the breath, little hold at the junction, changing the finger, exhaling more gently at first, and a little more forcefully toward the end, through the left. And one more time, inhaling right. And exhaling left. When you're done, releasing the hand. And feeling that sense of openness, spaciousness on the left side. And now we'll clear the central channel for the third set of 3 breaths. So we'll inhale through both nostrils, tracing the path of the side channels down to the junction, hold slightly, and then we'll breathe out, up through the center, slowly imagining the subtle breath, moving up the central channel, clearing the channel. Again, inhaling through both sides. Hold slightly at the junction. And then exhaling up and out through the crown, more slowly, gently at first, a little more forcefully at the end. And when you're ready, a third time, in through both nostrils. Up and up and out the midline. And then sitting with that sense of the central channel, open and clear, as well as the side channel. Resting in the sense of openness and clarity. And then we're going to do a couple of what's called vase breaths, just to kind of get the knack for it. So we'll take an inhale into the belly. We'll gently hold the breath there. And while you're holding, imagine that you're pressing the plane of the diaphragm down and pulling the pelvic floor up at the same time. And sort of gently press the diaphragm and the pelvic floor together around the plane of the navel, just for as long as you choose, and then slowly release. And then you take a few natural breaths. And then one more time, taking an inhale into the belly and gently holding the breath. And while you're holding, imagine pressing the plane of the diaphragm down, pulling the pelvic floor up, and we press those together at the plane of the navel, not trying too hard. Gently works really well. Always holding only as long as you can with no strain. It should all feel comfortable, smooth. And when you're ready, we release. So the vase breath, slowly and gently draw energy into the central channel, causing us to open to the possibility of peace, stillness, and non-duality. And we prepped the central channel last week by opening the chakras that lie along it. So just always using a light touch and remembering that the pranayama is always optional, only if it feels like it's enhancing your practice. And we'll go right into our meditation. So let's take some moments to settle here, focusing the mind lightly on the breath in the body. So the essence of meditation from the point of view of these traditions, of what we might call self-inquiry. Who are we? It's a question. The essence of this sort of meditation is being aware of being aware. The being aware is what we most intimately are. And this shines in the midst of all experience. So the experience of being aware could be described simply as our self giving itself attention. How do we do this in practice? If I were to ask you to stand up and take a step toward yourself, what would you do? Could any step take you any closer to or further from yourself? In being aware of being aware, there's absolutely nothing for the mind to do. It's the only truly effortless experience. Even breathing requires the diaphragm to contract and release, however subtly. So this is completely natural. The most direct way to access the experience of being aware is to ask yourself the question, am I aware? Instead of thinking the answer to the question, go to your experience. So where do you go in your experience to see if you're aware? That's the key. So you ask yourself, am I aware? And you go to some part of your experience to check if you're aware. I want you to go to that experience and stay there. This is the practice of meditation from the point of view of this tradition. And to help the kind of sense of stabilizing and to support this exploration, if you'd like, you could take an inhale into the belly, hold the breath gently, pressing plane of the diaphragm down, pulling the pelvic floor up so they sort of squeeze a bit at the plane of the navel. Not trying too hard, only hold as long as you like, and then release. Go back to natural breathing. You could do a second one if you want, not if you don't want. So we've all been saying, I am this and I am that for decades. What is the I that I am that's temporarily qualified by a particular age or status or feeling? What do we refer to when we say I am? And please don't answer verbally for the moment. I want to use the question to take you to the experience. The Sufi poet Rumi said, flow down and down and down in ever widening rings of being. He meant, give your attention to your essential, unqualified being, which shines in the mind as the knowledge I am. Just referring to that sense of awareness, sense of being. Stay with the feeling of unqualified being, a pure sense of just being aware. And as we stay with it, it gradually loses all the qualities and attributes that we've superimposed on it over the years. That's why Rumi said, flow down and down and down in ever widening rings of being. The deeper we sink into our own being, the wider our being becomes. As attention sinks into our essential being, our being is gradually divested of all the qualities, the feelings, the attributes that have temporarily attached themselves to our essential, unqualified being. And then if you'd like, another one or two of the vase breaths, totally optional. You could inhale into the belly, lightly hold, pressing plane of the navel down, or plane of the diaphragm down, pelvic floor up, pressing together somewhere around the navel, lightly, gently, holding only as long as you like, as long as it feels nourishing, and then gently releasing. And then maybe one more round of the vase breath. Normally, our essential being is so thoroughly mixed with feelings, qualities, and attributes that its essential unconditioned nature is lost or veiled. When a feeling, for instance, of sadness appears, we say, I am sad. Our essential being seems to become the feeling of sadness. We define ourselves according to that feeling. I am sad. I am lonely. I am sick. In this way, our essential being is continuously losing itself in feelings, states, and qualities. In this way, our essential being seems to acquire limitations, finite qualities. It seems to acquire an age, a location, a gender, a status, a level of health, a level of wealth, a level of intelligence, etc. Be in touch with your essential being that is ground for all experience, but is not limited by any particular experience. Discover the unlimitedness of your essential self, the absolute freedom from all particular qualities of your essential being. We don't have to work hard at liberating our essential being from these qualities, but rather simply to recognize that it already is and always has been unconditioned by any particular thought, feeling state, or quality. So the essence of meditation is simply to give our essential being our attention. For our essential being to give itself its attention. To simply be aware of the experience of being aware. Ask yourself the question, am I aware? Where do you go in your experience to see if you're aware? Stay there. Rest there in effortless meditation. To know and be the reality of our experience, all we have to do is turn our attention toward the I that is at our center. And then let's take the palms together in front of the heart. And we'll bow. And we'll relax. So that's the essence of this sort of first portion of the practice, is just kind of dropping back away from the kind of normal daily identifications and into just the pure sense of being. And, just knowing that that's not generally a sustainable experience. Like to think that, that maybe the hardest part about that kind of meditation is you can only stay, you look to see, where do I look, see if I'm aware, and you go there. But that's not like, then you can't just stay there indefinitely, not most people. So that's what the pranayama is designed to enhance. And the week of concentration is to help us maybe stay a little longer, but try not to judge, it's very normal to sort of touch that space, and people stay different amounts, depending on sort of how they're made and whatever. But the idea isn't to, I must sustain this in order to, be successful, but rather you can just touch back in, maybe you go back to the breath and the body for a while. Then when you feel ready, touch back in, and it can be, lots of shorter experiences rather than going for some sustained experience. Just because it's, with mindfulness, you're watching the breathing, there's like something, or the body, there's something more concrete to watch. And because this isn't as concrete, it doesn't, stabilize as long.
That's what I was going to say, is with the mindfulness, you're focused on something. So it can be always there, even if your mind wanders away from it, it's always there. This feels to me sometimes like I'm waiting for something to happen.
Yeah.
Like you're just like waiting for it to, like you're just like, and I think the more you force that and like wait, and it gets further away.
Exactly. So we're not, ideally we're not waiting for something to happen. We're just resting as long as we can rest. And then maybe you take a break and do mindfulness, and then you look again. But trying to sustain it doesn't work. And then, just waiting for something to happen would be sort of counterproductive. So
yeah, it's weird because it seems like the more you concentrate and the more you like actually like have that physical like forcing of like trying to concentrate, the further it gets away.
Yes.
It's very strange.
Because what we're going for is relaxing and simple, pure being. So just, only do it as long as you only rest, as long as you can rest naturally, and then literally go back to mindfulness. And then when you're ready, look again. And it's fine to wait a while, because the point is to touch in, not to stay. Yeah. So your homework will be recordings 1 through 6. And I think 7 we'll do together next time, as I remember. Maybe you choose to do the mindful breathing before the practice. Maybe you choose to do 1 or 2 base breaths intermittently when it's not in the recording. So when you choose to, not at all required.
So this time, the pranayama plus the breaths that we did didn't bother me. I'm pretty sure that what bothered me was the clearing of the chakras.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this, like the clearing of the nadis, was not like the channels didn't seem to bother me as much. Cool. Just doing that, but it was the throat and the heart chakra, especially like doing those clearing things, was just kind of, it was really activating. I don't know why.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So and we're not going to do those anymore. That was just a little prep, just because those really sort of train concentration. But this is more to help just sort of resting in openness. So again, do them, don't do them a ton, but, feel free to sprinkle them through if you like or not. And, save any questions. I'm going to send out the article. Lindsay's read this probably 10 times, and Jeff's already received it a couple of times, but Robin hasn't yet, the Adyashanti article on the ego. So I'll send that out to everyone, but obviously you may have already read it. No need to reread it. Just for some context, some theory, and have fun with it, and maybe bring questions for next week if you have them from the practices.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I can't wait to do them all now in order. I'm excited.
Yeah, cool. All right, have fun with it. Have a good concert this afternoon.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I have to drive to Albuquerque now. So.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.